Hello and welcome to our weekly Parsha Share with the commentary of the Alshach. I am late this week. Again, sorry, these short Shabbases and all sorts of things like snowfall make it sometimes difficult to get the job done on time. I regret this. I am British. Anyway, so basically, welcome. I'm sorry it's a week late, but as you'll see, it's not out of time. What we're about to learn together in is going to be absolutely fundamental, and it runs through all the parshas of Shemos, all the Exodus story, but really every waking moment of a Jew's life. So you'll see that it all fits together. At least I hope you'll see that it fits together very nicely. Let's get the order right and start with our tefillas and hope for the share to generate skusim for the various people who are in need of a refuah shleima. Chaim Mordechai Dov ben Esther, Benjamin Zev ben Yafa Heni Yenta, Rafal Chai ben Sora, Chana Gittel, Bas Leah Malka, Uriah Chaim ben Chana Yehudis, Rochel Levana Bas Shirley Malka, Ben Fega Chaya and Eliyahu Yaakov Ben Esther should all have a refuah shlema. Let me remind you, if you'd like the shir dedicated to somebody whose yortzeit is coming or who needs a refuah shlema, or in a more happy note, it's a simcha, it's a bar mitzvah, it's an engagement, or it is a chasna, then please contact me, send me an email to yy@askrabbiyyy.com, yy@askrabbiyyy.com, and I'll be very happy to dedicate this year for any of those good purposes. Okay, so I'll say this is very, very fundamental, what we're going to be looking at now. So fundamental that let's start off with the Posuk and Rashi. So Shemos, Ve'el Shemos. Notice it says Vo'el. We'll come back to that in a minute. And these, when I was in elementary school, primary school in Scotland and the UK, it used to say V and is a joining word. This means that this is joined to what came before. And that joint, that weld, we're going to examine through the eyes of the Ramban in his introduction to Shemos in just a second. However, let's read just a few of the psukim to get us focused. Ve'elishmais b'nei Yisrael habayim Mitzrayma es Yaakov ishu beis with Yaakov, each with their families. They came, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehudi, Yisachar, Zvulun, Binyamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, the heads of the tribes. But he called Nefesh Yotzei Yerach Yaakov Shivim Nefesh, and the entirety of those who came from the loins of Yaakov was 70 souls. So Yosef had Mitzrayim, and Yosef was already in Mitzrayim. So it's interesting here. You clearly see that you count grandchildren as children to come to the total of 70. But Yomas Yosef v'kolecha v'kol hadarahu. Yosef dies, as does the entire generation. Bnei Yisrael parav Yisrael v'yirbo v'yatzim v'mayim ma'id v'yitumala orasa isam. And then the Jewish people are fruitful and multiply, etc. And in previous Shurim, I pointed out to you what the Alshach says here. Of course, no word in the Torah is extra. No letter in the Torah is extra. All teaches us something. Another point to bear in mind is the Torah is particularly refined in its choice of words. Each word is specific to the point that it tries to make. And as I've also told you before, there is no such thing as a synonym in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Torah. Every word is specific. No words mean the same thing. There's always a different meaning. That's very, very interesting. Of course, everybody knows this famous statement, so let me read it to you again, because it's worth us pausing here for a second. Bnei Yisrael, this is Posuk Zayin, 7. Bnei Yisrael Poru, and the Jewish people were fruitful, V'yisritzu, and swarmed, of a yirbu, and multiplied, v'ya'atzim, became mighty, but ma'od, very, very much, very much. Rashi famously tells us, it's a medrash, the Widers have 6 expressions just to tell us that the Jewish people were fruitful, and the answer is because they had 6 babies at each delivery, which was obviously an indication that to own shares in a diaper business in those days would have been a very wise move. But to be serious, the 6, notice the language. Fruitful, if you say fruit, then it conjures up a very, very nice image. Usually, in my mind, an orange, an apple, a pear, a peach. These are nice things. Yishrutsu, swarmed, is something which isn't such a nice image. You think of horrible cockroaches and all sorts of creepy crawlies. And it's referring to the Jewish people. So to refer to the Jewish people, God's children, in a term which talks about them evoking nice imagery, makes sense. unpleasant, in fact, repulsive imagery doesn't make sense. So the Alshich points to this and says, no, it's talking about the different kinds of Jew that were to be found in Mitzrayim. So we'll come back to that as well in the course of our share. And then there's a new king, or is it a new king? Is it the old king with a new approach? Two themes run through the commentaries on this. V'yochel melech chodesh Mitzrayim. Eshel Yodov Yosef didn't know Joseph, or at least pretended not to know Joseph. V'yomei Elama, he says to people, Hini am ben Yisrael rabba otzim minim. The Jewish people are more numerous and mightier than us. One of my first teachers pointed out the old anti-Semitic stereotypical attack on the Jewish people. What's the problem with Jews? There's just too many of them, right? Too many dirty Jews. Rab otzim minim hova nischak maloi. And here's the key word we want to get to. Let us be wise with them. What's the wisdom? The wisdom is, if you remember, it was only the last fraction of the 210 years the Jews are in Mitzrayim. It's only the last bit in which was really horrible and appalling. But the first bit was extremely nice, and that was part of the plan. Hova nischak malon. Now, to say, let's be wise, let's devise a plan that will get the Jews, means that you have to understand exactly how the Jews work, what their relationship with God, Hashem, is, in order, as Rashi makes quite clear, to make sure that, as it were, you avoid the pitfalls or the minefields that God has set for those who oppose him. Surely we can work our way around the pitfalls. If we drown the babies, and God promised, so they know who God is, even though they pretend they don't, Hashem promised not to bring another flood to the world, and as he always punishes Minik and Minik, while they really know what Hashem is like and what he does, he won't be able to get us because he'd have to punish us by drowning us, and he's promised never to bring another flood to the world. But as Rashi points out, he didn't promise not to bring them to another flood. But you see that they clearly knew how the Jews worked. Okay, all the enemies of the Jewish people are students of the Jewish people. They know when to attack and how to attack. And indeed, if I remember rightly, Hezbollah in the north of Israel had planned another October the 7th to happen on October the 7th of the following year, because, of course, the psychological damage that's done by this and erode the morale of the Jewish people would be enormous. Our enemies know us. They study us. So as they know that there's a relationship with God and they know how God works, let's be clever with them. So as I say in my shirim very often, if you really hate Jews, you really hate Jews, and you want to get rid of them, be nice to them. It's the societies which have been nicest to the Jews, kindest to the Jews, most welcoming to the Jews, that see the greatest attrition rate and disappearance of the Jews as a consequence. If you really want to get rid of the Jews, be nice to them, and they'll do the job for you. They'll get rid of themselves. They'll be very busy abandoning any knowledge of what and who they are. They'll be able to pass that on to the children. They'll be further removed. They'll all, of course, marry into the non-Jewish society, abandon any Jewish value, and be ignorant of all Jewish values. And that's exactly what they wanted to do. But it's something more than that. As the commentators say, they knew that Hashem is the Shema Yisrael, the guardian of the Jewish people. This is what we've been talking about in the last 2 weeks' shirim, if you remember, or if you've been following me, is the guardian of the Jewish people, and they knew another truth about God. It's the one we were talking about over the last couple of weeks. God's guardianship of the Jewish people, if he's going to be employed looking after us, we have to commission the employment. We have to invite him. We have to want him to do that. And we'll come back to that idea in a second. Okay, that's, as it were, the introduction to the share. Now, as we're going on to book 2, let's look at the Ramban. And we'll comment about what he has to say here. And this is, you'll see how the last 2 shirim, the themes are very, very matim, as they say in Hebrew, perfectly fit with what we're going on to, which is why I said we're not really missing much, because this will run through all of the centers and, in fact, all of Jewish life. So this is just one paragraph, just to see it, so you're not scared, because I'm going to read this to you, this paragraph here. If you're watching it in video, it's about 12 lines, so Allow me to read to you. Hishlim Hakos of Sefer Bereshis. Now that we've concluded Sefer Bereshis, the end of the book of Genesis, Shehu Sefer Yitziris B'Chodesh Ha'olam Yitziris Kol Anoinser, which is the book that records the entire creation and what God did and how He created everything. It'll be Mikroy Ha'obas Kunam. And not only that, the story, the dramas, the I almost said adventures, but that sounds flippant. But the struggles of the Avot, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and of course of the Imahot of Sarah, Rachel, and Leah, Shehim Ke'inyan Yetziras Lazarim, which, the very interesting language, Shehim Ke'inyan Yetzira Lazarim, because, and this is something we were talking about over the last few weeks, that what Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov did, achieved, created a change in the DNA. Remember, we talked about this now scientifically proven. The choices of people actually can be scientifically shown to alter the DNA. The choices, the stories of the Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and their wives, the founders of the Jewish people, was going to form and create the Jewish people. And as a consequence, and more than just a consequence, but everything that happened to the Avot, as it famously says, Maisa Ovas Siman Labonim, what happened, I nearly said the word adventure again, but the life stories and the challenges of the progenitors of the Jewish people, then that was going to form the Jewish people and equip them when they face almost identical circumstances. And of course, the first exile is going to be Egypt. And so where's the parallel? Are you serious? Avram goes down to Egypt. Now the Jewish people go down to Egypt. They try to kill all the boys to leave the woman because they wanted to take the woman, exactly as Pharaoh wanted to take Sarah, the first Jewish woman, Avram's wife. The parallels go on because they were able to beat these challenges. Then that ability, that possibility and potential is programmed into their children, the Jewish people, and we're going to be able to do the same thing. Okay, so therefore he says, it says, and therefore, after it's told you the story of the creation, that's almost like the construction of the model or of the machine, which is the Jewish people. Now we're going to test drive the machine, the car, the plane, whatever you like, to see if it's, if it can withstand the stresses and strains in application, not just theory, through generations, not just the great founders who could do great things, but can we? Remember, we've talked about this in previous weeks. Why Paro couldn't understand Lashon HaKodesh, because Lashon HaKodesh is a link to the soul. Lashon HaKodesh is a part of Hashem. A Jewish soul comes from Hashem. It's all interconnected. Well, that's all very nice in theory, but can you actually put it into effect? And remember, of course, famously when Yaakov sends a message to Esav, Im Lovan Garte Tarig Shemati, I have stayed with Lovan. But says Rashi that I have stayed Garti is the same letters as the words Tariag, which means 613. Don't think that having stayed with a crook and a fraud and a cheat, that I was corrupted and I was as bad as him, or I became as bad as him. And no, I kept 613 mitzvahs despite living with Lavan. But as Rabbi Yerucham says famously, no, it's more than that. It's only because I stayed with Lavan that I was able to keep the mitzvahs. It's only if you are actually you get the car and you put it on the racetrack or the test track, and you're able to run it through all its paces. Do you know that it can withstand this? You need to face the challenge to turn the possibility into reality. What the Obbas and Imo has achieved, now the Jewish people are going to be faced with the possible challenges, yes, but the challenges will lead to the possibility of showing that we're road tested, we're ready for the long journey ahead. So therefore it moves on to the first challenge, first test drive of the model of the Jewish people. And of course, the story of how we got out of that. But again, Chosva Haskell, Shemos Mitzrayim. So it starts off with telling you the people went down to Mitzrayim, even though it's already told us that, but it's telling you now they are gone down to Mitzrayim in us, through us. And then the Golas Vahini, Golas Einenu Nashim Ad Yom Shavuot, and the exile is not over until they go back from Mitzrayim to their place. I should go off at a slight tangent, if you forgive me. People are asking me, where am I going to be speaking this Pesach? Which is quite flattering. And the answer is, we hope to be living in our apartment in Yerushalayim. So even though I was invited, I was very blessed and very flattered to be invited to Portugal, to be a scholar in residence at a hotel in Portugal, and Italy, which I like, and other places too. I mean, the whole point of Yetzias Mitzrayim is to come to live in Eretz Yisrael. So why on earth would I want to arrive in Eretz Yisrael to live there, take up residence there, Aliyah, and then 3 weeks later go to Chutz La'oretz to celebrate Yetzias Mitzrayim? Sounds a bit strange. So anyway, it's only exile is going to be over until you go back to your place. Al malas avoisam yeshuva, and so that the milo, the level that the office Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and the mothers achieved, will now apply to the Jewish people through them going through. Sorry about that. Through the experience of having passed the test of Mitzrayim, then they can withstand the tests ahead, because, as the Medrash says, Mitzrayim is the progenitor of all the future exiles. There's a little bit of Golus Mitzrayim in every exile. The destruction of every Jewish child, every male child, that's half of the Jews. Hitler achieved the destruction of a third of the Jews. There's an echo of Mitzrayim. All of them, there's an echo of Mitzrayim. The Hanukkah story, the Greeks trying to seduce the Jews to get them to give up being Jewish and become Greek. That's, as we said, law. It's all in this story here. Fine. And eventually when we come and build the Mishkan, and then the Shekhinah, the presence of God, dwells amongst us as he's supposed to do, and we are worthy of that, that's the end of the exile. Remember, you can be in the exile, living in the land of Israel. Good. That's our introduction. Interesting, I think. Now let's see if we can quote an Alshach too. The Alshach wants to know, what's the purpose of this whole thing? Why is it that the Jewish people had to go down to Egypt? He goes through a long list of various well-known commentators, including the Rambam, who offer reasons and explanations as to why this could and should be. And he expresses dissatisfaction with all of them. Not to say that they're wrong, it's just he feels that the question remains stronger than the answers provided. Or not, maybe put it differently, there are so many different answers, or so many different aspects of it, and only giving one answer in one aspect of it, it's insufficient to the enormity of the question, why did God take us to Mitzrayim? And he wants to answer it differently. And it's a very, very interesting differently. And it's the one we've been talking about in the last 2 weeks. It's the deal between God and the Jewish people individually, and the deal between God and the Jewish people collectively. So if you remember, let's just go back to Rabbi Yerucham in his Das Chochmah Musar, in which he said, what is that deal? So if you by any chance have this Sefer at home, Das Chochmah Musar, you'll find this in the first volume. It's in page Shin Kov Vav, or rather, the bit I'm going to quote is in Shin Kov Vav. The actual essay is Shin Kov Daled, and it's called Kibi Choshev Ba'aflatehu. They pine for me, says King David, Tehillim Tzadik Aleph, and verse 14. They pine for me. The Ramban famously says in Moreh Nevuchim, the difference between love is, you love somebody, you love your mother, you love your father, you love your wife, you love your husband, you love your children. But the word cheshik, ahava, is love. Cheshik is effectively obsessed. Think about Chosn and Kala when they're newly engaged. They just can't keep their minds off each other. They literally are on the phone all the time until they're actually standing underneath the chuppah and can get on with their life together. The relationship that we are expected to have with Hashem is that we pine for him. We can't wait to be with him. There's a famous story of Reb Shlomo Volba, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, always daven. There's two times, of course, to daven mincha. The earliest time, available time, mincha early in the day, or later at night. Very often people daven mincha and Marav together. He always chose the earlier time to daven mincha, and people said, "Why? I can't bear to be away for Hashem that amount of time, the longer time. A relationship which is so real that you just, wow." So basically, here's the here's what Rabbi Yocham has to say on this, which is very, very interesting indeed. That is to say that the idea of Hashem being the Shema Yisrael is dependent, as I said before, is how much we have, as it were, uh, paid him to be so, or attached ourselves to us. In other words, I'm trying to be too clever. The more you attach yourself to Hashem, the more he's attached to you. And if you detach for any amount of time from Hashem, relative to the amount of time you've detached from Hashem, then that's how the amount of time is going to be detached from you. So the Rambam, and if you remember, this is last week and the week before, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, the third part of his Moreh Nevuchim guide for the perplexed, in chapter Nun Aleph, he says, no, chapter 51, he says that basically that if you are never disconnected from Hashem, then you are invincible. The Rambam goes on to say that the greatest tzaddikim, Nevi'im and tzaddikim, who things went wrong in their life, which secular philosophers or not secular, but theologians of non-Jewish origin try to point to as an indication that God takes his eye off the ball and doesn't treat everybody equally. Not true. He treats people equally. Do they treat him equally is the real question. He says that when the greats of the Jewish people, as it were, bad things happen to them, it's because for that moment, for whatever reason, they took their eye off the ball. You remember we told the story about how King David could die on the Shabbos day. He was predicted to die when he never stopped learning Torah, connected to God, always. And as a consequence, the Satan couldn't get him. It was only when he was going down steps that Satan made one of the steps, collapse under him. So for a second, he fell and was not thinking of Torah, learning in Torah, that the Satan was able to get him. So if you are a great tzaddik, you're going to be connected to God about all of the time. All of the time. Rabbi Yashiv was once asked, as the Gemara says, anybody who disconnects from Hashem, then it's a bad thing. What's the shear? What's the amount of time that's called disconnection from Hashem? And Rabbi Yashiv, the great giant of Yerushalayim, paused for a second and answered by blinking twice. That amount of time. If I remember rightly, the Gemara that talks about this says once. Now, at this point, you're going to panic and say, "But that's not me. I'll never be like that." No, you don't have to ever be like that. You have to be heading in that direction. If that's the trajectory of your life as much as you can, then Hashem realizes, remember, we're all marked according to our abilities. You're not expected to be a Moshe Rabbeinu, but you're expected to do what Moshe Rabbeinu did, which was to maximize the potential you have. The potential you have might not be to lead Klal Yisrael out from Egypt, but the potential you have might be to lead yourself from wherever you started to a much greater place. Then you're on the right path, and you can expect that level of shmira. Says the Rambam, somebody who never thinks about Hashem, who never connects with Hashem, it's like being in a dark place, being in a mine, being blind. Somebody who thinks about Hashem, but during business hours or whatever, takes his mind off Hashem, that's like, as it were, a cloudy day. There's light there, but it's diffused, it's not clear. But there are great tzaddikim who are attached to Hashem all of the time. That was Abram, that was Yitzhak, that was Yaakov. That's in us. Mitzrayim wants to disconnect it. Mitzrayim knows that, and therefore lets cause a disconnection. Get them to pull the plug, get them to disconnect from God, and then we can get them, because he's not there. So, says the Rabbi Yerucham, the thing that causes you to be connected to God or disconnected and then in trouble is simply how much you think about him, wake up and say Modi Ani with sincerity and reality. Thank you, Hashem. I'm awake. You give me another day. And then I want to rush to shul so I can talk to you. Obsessed with Hashem, as it were. That takes us to where we're supposed to be. And then he quotes the Posset in the Torah. He says, only after all, there's only a Posset in the Torah. They start upon him when it says in the Devarim Lamed Aleph Yud Zayin, and on that day when they hide from me, I will hide from them. This is a point us toward the story of Purim. That's what Hastir Astir, the word I will hide, is the same word as Esther. God was hidden in the Megillah. And Ki Zois Hasteras Ponim Anachta Gurmim. Because when God's hiding himself from us, we've caused it. We've caused us. This is a very, very important idea. The connection of the Jewish people that generates the Shmir, the protection of God, is when we keep connected. And the more we keep connected, the more he's connected to us. The more we disconnect, then the less we have him there. I wrote about this before I saw that Rabbi many years ago in this book here, which I think we're going to republish quite soon. On the Derech answers the questions that challenge Jewish minds. And right at the beginning of the book, in chapter 2, what is a Jew meant is called "What is a Jew meant to think about when confronted with the Holocaust?" And if I jump into the middle, I recommend this to you. I think it's an important essay. And almost the end of the Torah, Hashem warns Moshe what will happen after his death. And you'll find this in Devarim 31, 17 to 18. Hashem says to Moshe, when you go to lie with your fathers, and this people will rise up and lust after alien gods of the land into which they're coming, and they will abandon me and break my covenant which I've made with them, and my anger will burn against them on that day, and I will abandon them and hide my face from them, and they will be their enemies' prey. So it sounds rather really almost vengeful. They abandon me, they're going to be their enemies' prey, etc., etc. No. Let's see. It would seem to be that the conditions of the contract between the Rabbanu Shalom, the Almighty, and the Jewish people is spelled out here. Hashem says, if you give me up and chase after other belief systems or isms, if you give me up and chase after other belief systems, I'm sorry, I repeat that, then my ultimate punishment will be, okay, you want it? You got it. If we choose nationalism or socialism, and the nationalists or socialists turn on us, then the question is no longer how could God let this happen? Rather, how could we have let this happen? In every generation, there's an alternative system of belief available that tantalizes Jews. The isms come along, offers itself, and carries off thousands, sometimes millions of adherents. If this alternative fails us, then we have to bear the consequences. We chose it. There's a phenomenon that I would call the solitary remaining Jewish advocate. After an ism has proven itself bankrupt and failed, you will find solitary remaining Jewish advocates arguing that their particular fossil is vibrant, alive, and necessary. But that's going on to maybe a different point. The main point is, Hashem says, the relationship, when it's me and you, it's then I'm going to be looking after you. But if you demand that I withdraw, if you demand that I go away, then you can't blame me if I'm not there, if the nationalists or the socialists or the national socialists turn on you. You invested yourself in nationalism and German nationalists. Weren't you so proud to be a German? Berlin is our Jerusalem. Or you believed in socialism? You joined the Bund, or you joined the Yevsektia, the Jewish section of the Communist Party. You sent the rabbis to Siberia to die. And Stalin thanked you by lining you up against the wall and machine gunning you. Don't blame God. That's what you wanted. That's what you chose. And all the way through Jewish history, we see this phenomenon repeated again. Therefore, the Alshich says, why is it really that God takes us through this? It's to give those who want to leave the ability to leave. You see, to be a Ben Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abbas, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, to be one of their children, one of their daughters or sons, means you have to remain and want to be connected to them. It's in you. You are one of their children. There's a bit of them in you. And what they did was to be able to confront situations which we will face, are facing now, will face in the future, but we've already been programmed and given the ability to pass it by being their children. Some people want to leave the family. Some people in America legally sue their parents It's your fault that I was born. They want out from a fundamental perspective and a fundamental point of view. You should not have given birth to me. Now that you've given birth to me, I so much don't want to be here that you are divorced from being my parents. That's a position many Jews take. The reason that Hashem took us to Mitzrayim was simply a process by which those who wanted to leave, remember in the Plague of Darkness, Rashi famously says, and Rashi, of course, quotes almost always only one opinion in the Midrash, is that the four-fifths who stayed behind in Egypt died in Egypt and were buried during the Plague of Darkness. That's another opinion. Not that they died spiritually. They chose to stay in Egypt. They didn't want to be Jews. They didn't want to carry on that inheritance. And that's a phenomenon we see so very many times all the way through Jewish history. I saw an interview with George Soros, who was born a Jew and helped the Nazis in Hungary, pretending not to be a Jew, pointing them in the direction of Jewish homes which he could ransack with them, saying that, yes, he is a Jew, but he doesn't identify with them. Something different. He wants to exit and join the other side. And of course, he's done a very good job of that. We too can see that repeated at tens of thousands, maybe millions of times in a generation. It's only the Jews who want to be the sons of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the daughters of Sarah, and Rachel, who are going to be able to find within themselves, look to find within themselves the ingredients of their parents, which will allow us to get through even difficult times and the terrible times that we are in now. Says the Alshif, that's why we went to Israel. Ultimately, we would be facing 210 years of a bloody exile. But when you face the bloody times, Im Lov and Gati, or whatever other challenge, then often you find greatness within yourself, a Jewishness within yourself that you didn't know existed. That emerged, and that emerges, and that's going to carry you to Mount Sinai, when there's going to be a reconnection between Hashem and the Jewish people, and Shmira exists, then protection exists. For the ones who want to leave, who just don't have the stamina, the spiritual stamina for that, they have to be given a facility. To be able to come to Mount Sinai, it was only got those were in for the long haul, for the marathon, not the sprint. And that was why only one-fifth went. It's something that repeats itself through history. If you're watching this today, if you're part of this every week, that's a tiny indication. I'm sure you've got millions more that's the sort of person that you are. I look forward to seeing you next week. I'll try and make sure it's earlier than a Monday. I wish you all a wonderful remainder of the week.